Welcome to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement, a podcast where we dive into the physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being of the law enforcement officer.
Minor injury accident to the 2700 block of 156th Avenue Northeast.
All right, welcome back to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement. I'm your host, Vernon Phillips, and today we've got a special guest. We've got Scott Medlin, who is a former Marine, former law enforcement. He's also the host of the 10 Code podcast, and he's a speaker. He's an author. He's an all-around, well-rounded individual. So I appreciate it. Scott, I just want to give it over to you. Just kind of give a background of yourself, kind of your history, your hobbies, and all that kind of stuff.
Well, I appreciate you having me on the show, Vernon, and wow, the pressure's on now. Okay, thank you for that intro. Right out of high school, I went into the Marine Corps, and right after boot camp, graduated boot camp August 31st, 2001. I go to my 10-day boot camp leave, so if you can do the math, I report back in for Marine Corps combat training September 11th, 2001. One interesting day to report in for combat training. I knew right then and there at some point it's probably going to go to war. Fast forward 2 years later, not to say it was related, we'd have a different conversation about the campaign itself, but I was deployed 2003 and 2005 for Operation Iraqi Freedom, and that was the first time in my life I was exposed to the most visible, the most memorable, the most impacting trauma, and that was the first time I actually had to learn about trauma, because a year after getting home from the 2005 deployment, relationships were falling apart. I was very irritable, negative thinking. Relationships were falling apart at home. If I didn't mention that, sorry, too much coffee this morning. Anyway, but was diagnosed with post-traumatic stress disorder a year after getting home from Iraq. And then fast forward a year after that, graduated from college, and finally graduated from college, and then went into law enforcement, was sworn from 2007 to 2022. Really enjoyed the career overall, but it did have its heavy moments and unanticipated moments of struggle with mental health and relationships. So over the last few years since leaving law enforcement entirely, I've just made it my mission to do what I can to help those who are struggling within, but also help raise morale and empower law enforcement across the country. And I've been blessed to speak to first responders and law enforcement across the country. So, and been blessed to land on many podcasts, including yours now. So thank you.
Well, and I appreciate it. And there's a lot there that I want to unpack, but I know you've got your own podcast too as well that you've got that you set up. So we'll talk about that a little bit later. But obviously, you're no stranger to like the pressures of the job, the stress of the job, because you worked several years in it. So what is something that you do? I mean, especially now looking back, because I'm sure that like most of us throughout their career, unless you were kind of educated early on, you didn't really do a great job taking care of ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
So what do you do on a regular basis to just take care of your physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual well-being?
I'd say a huge game changer has been waking up early enough to give myself time to prime my mind, body, and spirit. I mean, really, I have 3 kids now, and that's still, even though I'm not in law enforcement, it's crucial to wake up before the chaos starts. So,
yes, absolutely.
Yeah, that has been a huge factor. And I wish I would have done that earlier in my law enforcement career. What I normally did was wake up. I gave myself enough time to wake up, eat breakfast, get the uniform on, and hit the road. And of course, I would do things like watch the news and check social media. I made sure of that. But I mean, I was good about working out and praying and keeping my faith life going. But priming the mind and body and spirit, that was particularly mindset. That would have been a game changer a lot earlier. So that's like a big thing. It's just the priority is showing up for other people, but we have to make it a priority to show up for ourselves as well. And therefore you'll show up that much better for others.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that's something that for us, on our podcast, we really try to drive home is like, hey, making sure you're taking care of yourself, because the more, when you take care of yourself, then in turn, you can actually take care of other people better, especially starting at home. And, you said you got 3 kids, I've got 4, and they're ages 12 all the way down to 2. So we're, Yeah, so we're a hopping house too. So making sure that you find that time to work in that. I know that for my wife, her big thing is she'll try to get up before everybody else so she can get her her quiet time in. Because if you don't, and they come out, man, that's it. Like
Yeah.
it's not going to happen. It's not going to
Yeah.
happen.
And it's almost like if you don't do that, then you're in survival mode. And it's what's the talk about at the department as well? It's surviving the career. And if we prime our minds and our bodies and always have that victor mindset, that thriving mindset, then yeah, we're rising above and we're not just focused on getting through, because that's
Yeah.
existing, in my opinion. We need to live. And sometimes that can be lost, particularly at home or at work when I just got to get through. And, yeah, you might not be thinking that way on purpose, but it's all too easy to sink into that trap, which can ultimately lead to mental health issues down the road, particularly if you don't cope in a healthy way. So yeah, show up for yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point, and I appreciate you sharing that. So when you look at the law enforcement career and just everything that's going on, do you think that we do a good job or do a right by our new recruits and kind of onboarding them to, hey, this is what their career really looks like. These are really the stressors, the impacts you're going to have. Where do you think we are on that level of training?
I believe there's a shift, but there needs to be one heck of a more of a shift.
Yeah.
I truly believe that the statistics are very alarming still to this day. And they are not alarming in the sense of we just need to be like, oh, shoot, we need to do more. And then nothing changes. Change is hard. But I read a statistic the other day that 83% of law enforcement officers believe that their mental health impacts their job and performance, but thus in turn, it leads to sleep disturbances and irritability and stuff like that. And I read a stat on, I think it was Police One, that in the state of Florida, 1 out of every 5 law enforcement officers are suffering symptoms of depression or PTSD. And some of this, a lot of times, goes untreated. That's obviously not good. When it comes to the recruits, I do know of some states where there's maybe a 4-hour block of mental health stuff, and you have veteran officers are coming in and just giving stories and then how they dealt with it. But we're not going over how we as humans are innately wired to focus on negativity. And good gosh, you're already going to be exposed to enough negativity as is in the career of law enforcement. We're not, the recruits are not being trained. Hey, if you decide to focus on negativity, if you decide to focus on the stressors, if you decide to focus on the trauma, then guess what? It's just going to exacerbate itself more and more in your mind and your body. I'm not knocking those coming in and saying, hey, you can rise above and here's what I did to do that. But we've got to actually put in knowledge and then implement steps the same way you implement steps to patrol techniques. Like there's steps you do on a traffic stop to keep you safe. There's steps we need to put into place early on in these recruits and newer officers, particularly because they're more impressionable, that they can take action on day in and day out, not just as a reactive state, but as a proactive state to say, hey, look, I know I'm going to be exposed to things. I know I'm going to feel stressed. I have to maintain a routine of taking care of myself through steps like stretching or meditation or journaling. And I know these sound cheesy, but what are we going to do? Keep on doing what we've been doing? Well, we're going to keep getting the same results.
Yeah.
And I know, let me go on a brief tangent right quick.
No,
so many times, some officers have told me, I've heard it a lot. Well, leadership needs to do better. Okay, I'm all for effective leadership. It has to happen, yes. And a toxic environment can absolutely be draining on somebody. So you may be a victim of it, but it ultimately is up to you not to rely or stay in victimhood. And ultimately, you can't rely on other people to bring you happiness and fulfillment. You're going to have to do it for yourself, even though you're going through hard times. So we have a lot of work to do, but overall, yes, I believe there's a shift. I mean, your podcast, my podcast, many other people out there speaking on this stuff, there's clearly a shift, but like I said, we have more work to do.
No, absolutely. And there is a shift. And I think that, you're right on. I think the standard is, people coming in and sharing, their stories. I know for us here in Florida that, in the intro block of, intro to law enforcement, there's, they kind of hit on emotional intelligence and they hit on, distress and they hit on, critical incidents, things like that. But I think it's like a 12-hour block, but that's just a short, you know, section of just hitting on those little things. But it's like, hey, this is what it is, and then it's moving on,
Yeah.
right? So even having somebody come in and sharing a story and being like, hey, this is what happened to me, this is what I did. It's like, but you have to give them, okay, so that story's great, right? Just like you said, and I'm not knocking that, but then you also have to give them something with that, right? Give them something tangible that they can take hold of and apply to themselves. So it's not just about sharing the story; it's also about giving that education, right?
Yes.
So educating them, on the whole aspect of emotional intelligence. Hey, how do your emotions impact your day-to-day decision making? How
Oh,
does
big
it
time.
impact the way that you perceive yourself, express yourself, how you interact with other people, right? How it impacts your decision making and how it impacts your stress management. Um, so, I mean, I was fortunate enough last year to go through and get trained in, doing EQI and doing the assessments and, doing those reports with people. So, I've got a little bit more of an insight on that, but just to say, hey, this is emotional intelligence is XYZ and it's good to have it. So what have we done
Right.
for them? Right.
Right. Right.
We didn't give them a whole, hey, this is what it is.
Yeah.
And if you actually take an assessment and it measures you in these categories, and then if you can tweak it here a little bit and tweak it there, like, you can be more emotionally balanced, which in turn makes you a more effective law enforcement officer, law enforcement professional. But not only that, but also a mom or a dad, a husband, a wife, friend, aunt, uncle, whatever that other category is that you fall into outside of law enforcement. It also gives you the ability to be more balanced there. So
Yes.
it's like, hey, let's give them the actual tools then and educate them and give them the resources. So I'm fortunate enough that, I get to teach different blocks that are in service training. And sometimes I get 2 hours, sometimes I get an hour. So it's like, I'm trying to cram as much information in as you can.
Right. Right.
But like, hey, look, these are the things that happen, like stress. Here's some ways to offset and mitigate stress, right? And you give them some of the practical applications. But then, like you said, but then it's going to be up to the individual, right? We can talk about it, we can educate, and we can say, hey, here you go. But you have to be the one to put it into practice. You
Hmm.
have to be the one to step back and say, okay, I'm worth it enough to invest in myself so that I can be the best version of myself for everybody else. But if you're held together with bubble gum and duct tape on the inside, how effective do you think you're going to be, interacting with other people if
Yeah.
you can barely keep it together yourself?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's going to come tumbling down at some point. It really will. Whether it's on the outside, as in you lash out at somebody and all of a sudden now you're facing a massive complaint or worse, or you start crumbling in the inside, you're going to have physical health effects. Relationships are going to start to deteriorate. That's another thing. Like we talk about complacency kills. Well, I want to say let's not be complacent with how we are doing. Like
Yeah.
nobody is immune to this. Nobody. I don't care how tough you think you are. Uh, just it's nobody's immune to it. But yeah, complacency, and then knowing that if you don't address it, it will address you,
Oh,
and
yeah.
it's not going to be good.
Yeah. I mean, the complacency kills, but, stress kills. That's the other thing. If you,
Yeah, an unhealthy reaction to stress definitely kills. Yeah.
if you don't deal with the stresses going on in your life, right? Or if you're in that constant state of, hypervigilance, high drive, and you're just like dumping cortisol, boom, 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 that's going to wreak havoc on your body, right?
Yep.
Not like physically, like, not just cognitively, because we always think, oh, if you're stressed out, then cognitively you're like in on the mental aspect, you're not, you've got, brain clouding and things like that. And you can't think straight. And it's like, no, it affects so much more than that, right? It affects your overall health. It affects, your gut, your skin, your breathing, your cardiovascular. It
Hmm.
burns out your adrenal glands, and then you start getting disease and fatigue and sickness. And so that's something that we always try to, hey, look, make sure you're addressing this stuff, because it's like you said, if you don't, it's gonna show up
Yeah.
some way, somehow. It's gonna manifest in your life, and it's gonna be there. And then instead of dealing with whatever it was at the time. Now you're dealing with everything you've taken and internalized for the last 15, 20 years.
Yeah.
So,
And even though even though we may not be well at some points, it's like, it's so weird how our brain likes what's familiar and wants to conserve energy, that actually doing something new to help yourself work your way out of either a physical harm or mental harm or fix a relationship, like, that's so hard to do, even though you know it's the right thing to do. And that's stuff that I talk about when I go speak across the country. It's like human nature to avoid pain and seek pleasure. And I mean, the first thing that comes to mind is the use of alcohol, because it gives that instant sense of pleasure and escape. But let's face it, it's a drug, it's a depressant. We got to keep that in perspective. But to avoid pain, it's like, even though you are not doing well, and say you are coping in a way of adrenaline seeking behavior or the alcohol or impulsivity through other actions, it's hard to change, even though you know what you're doing is unhealthy. But this is where I believe that support from others comes into play as well. This can be huge in our health, is having the right people around us, particularly at home. That's why it's all the more reason to strengthen those relationships day in and day out at home, but also to make this more of a normal thing to speak about within the law enforcement culture. Just to say, hey, I've got your back on a call, but I've also got your back if you're going through something internally. It's some people say the stigma's not there anymore. I would have a hard time with that. I think people are still maybe not worried about being judged, but more like consequences on their job, or they talk up to someone and they say, hey, look, I'm really struggling. This thought of this one call, or this addiction I'm battling, it's just going on and on and on and on. And then they're like worried that someone's going to go run their mouth and rather than be there to support them. So it's very complicated. It really is. But it's one of those where you ultimately have to take action, and it'll be worth it 100%.
Yeah. And I agree with you. I think that it's getting better, but I definitely think that stigma, and I know some people don't like to use the term stigma, that, let's stop using that. But it's like, well, unfortunately, it is what it is, right? There is this thought, there is this negative belief in the first responder community, the law enforcement community, that, hey, if I make use of resources, if I tell somebody that I'm struggling or I've got this going on, then that means I'm weak, or that means that I'm not going to be able to, do my job. They're going to put me at a desk. They're going to take my gun. They're going to take my badge. So we don't say anything.
Well, within the last year, I believe it was 2,800 police officers were surveyed. And I read this on Police One, 2,800 police officers surveyed. And I believe it was over half of them said there was still a stigma associated with seeking mental health support. I mean, you're right. It is what it is.
Yeah. And that's the thing. And, and I always tell people this, is that we are our own worst enemies because we don't want to share, right? Because of that thought. So we're like, hey, I don't want to be looked at differently, or I don't want my gun to be taken. So don't say anything, internalize it, keep pushing it down. And then because we're not willing to go and seek out the help that we need or get the resources we need, we actually create the very thing that we don't want to happen.
Right.
Because it goes on so long that it gets to a point where somebody has to step in, the agency or the department has to step in and say, okay, hey, right? And then what we didn't want to happen to begin with happens because we weren't willing to come to the table ourselves and be like, hey, this is what's going on. I need some help.
Yeah.
And that's the reality of it, is unfortunately, you can either step in and take and say, hey, take responsibility. Like, hey, I need some help. Or eventually it's going to manifest to the point where, somebody else steps in, your agency, or you get to a place in your life where you're hopeless, you're helpless, and you feel worthless, right? That trifecta that puts people in a bad place. And then that's when we see suicide, because they feel isolated. They feel like they're the only ones. They feel like nobody else is going through what I'm going through. And the reality of it is there's a lot of other people dealing with a lot of the same things. They may not be dealing with it the same way, but they're still dealing with a lot of the trauma, a lot of the hurt, a lot of the, just the junk that you get from the job, or even, those who were veterans before they jumped into law enforcement, they've got double dose of what's going on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So,
definitely. And I'll share what I did when I was battling an addiction 2 years into my career. I'm not telling people to do this, but this is what I did. I got help on my own. Like, I realized I was battling something and I didn't feel comfortable going to the EAP. So I just reached out to someone on my own, and I got the treatment, and I overcame it within 7 months or something. I mean, it was 6 to 7 months. I mean, I realized it right then. I was like, oh shoot, I can't. I got to get help. So, like I said, I reached out to an outside source. Work never even found out about it, and I wasn't doing anything illegal, but it was unfortunate. I'll share what it is. I wrote about it in a book. I've been on podcast talking. It was a porn addiction, and it's embarrassing to say it, but then again, that whole point about people feel like they're the only ones going through it, you're not. And one of the big relief, one of the, I guess, a factor of relief whenever I went in to see the doctor was he said, "You know how many men come to me and say they're battling this? A lot." He said, "Your job, clergy." He said, "All these different
oh yeah,
professions." He said, "Do not shame yourself, and we're going to get you better." And he did. Uh, but it was, yeah, I felt that whole, I'm struggling. I'm alone. This is embarrassing. Why me? And it was. I'm not justifying the addiction. It was awful that I got into that, and I don't know how it started. It just did, and but I was shaming myself. I was like, "Why is this happening?" And but like I said, I got outside help. That's what I did. I'm not telling anyone to do that, but if you feel like that's the way that you can get help without work necessarily being involved, then, well, that's what I did, and I'm glad I did it because it would have probably ended up bad if I didn't.
yeah, and people don't understand that, and we could do a whole nother episode probably, just on that, and
Hmm.
and that particular addiction. But people don't understand like what that really does, in your mind, what it does in your relationships, what it does, like moving forward. Because, and the people are, oh, I don't understand. What's the big deal about porn and pornography? Like, it's like, well, it
Nah,
man,
yeah,
once it gets its hooks, it's there, and
yeah.
unless you,
The doctor told me. He said, "Well, I'm glad you came to me because that does the same thing that crack cocaine does to the brain, like the same exact chemical reaction." He said that's why it's so addicting.
oh yeah, it's that, it's releasing that chemical, and it's just every time it's giving you that hit,
Hmm.
right? And when you think about law enforcement, that career, how much time do officers spend alone in their patrol car?
Hmm. Yeah,
Right?
I remember he asked me that. He said,
Yeah.
do you do this at work?" I said, "Oh gosh, no." I said, "I'm not that bad." and
Yeah.
I was like, "Thank goodness." But still, I mean, he asked that because of the time you have alone, and there's not always someone watching you. It's that can be a very bad demon within,
Yeah.
to fight. Yeah, no, I'm
And
glad you brought that up.
it definitely, it could be, and obviously it's a negative coping strategy, right?
Yes.
Because what it does is it's removing you out of the current reality that you're in. And that's what it is. But not only that, but it's also putting these unrealistic expectations on any future intimacy you might have with your significant other,
Yeah.
because
Yeah.
none of that is none of that is real.
Right.
Like,
Right. Yeah.
right, and we know that, and like I said, we could go on a whole other, episode on just
Yeah.
this. But
Yeah.
I think this is probably one of those, addictions or even coping strategies, negative coping strategies, that we often don't talk about in the profession, right? Because it's kind of one of those taboo, like,
It,
unspoken, but
right.
it's probably more prevalent than we think it is, and probably not just with male law enforcement professionals, because there's a lot of research that also talks about how it's also climbing in, with females as well.
Oh
And
wow.
so it's just, we just have this idea that only men are the ones that struggle with it. Now, prominently, yes. Why? Because we're visual creatures, right?
Hmm.
Like we get that satisfaction, that gratification
Hmm.
through the visual stimulation, where, females are more intimate, more with the touch, and all that. So, well, without trying to go down this rabbit hole, right? But I'm glad you shared that, because I think that it definitely is something that's there, something that, people are struggling with, and absolutely, the devil will use that to his advantage, and he will make you feel isolated. He will make you feel like you're the worst person in the world. He will make you
Yeah.
say, "Hey, no one else is doing this. Why would you even share with somebody?" But that's with addiction or anything you're struggling with. That's the key thing, is when you share it with somebody else, right?
Yeah.
When you actually verbalize that, now it's out. Now it's no
Yeah.
longer a secret. Now it's no longer a secret battle that you can't do on your own. Now you're bringing somebody else in and saying, "Hey, this is what's going on. I can't keep doing this." Whether it's alcohol, whether it's drugs, whether it's, the pornography, whether it's, extramarital affairs, whatever it is. Once
Hmm.
you expose that, right, bring that into the light, then there can be healing. Then there can be recovery.
Yeah.
So, but you got to be able to step to the plate and do that. And, before, in my belief, before God comes in and humbles you real quick,
Oh,
right?
very true. Yeah,
So,
very true. And one of my motivating factors was I was going to be getting married in less than a year. I was like, I cannot bring this into a marriage. So if anyone's battling it and they're married, even with alcoholism or anything else, a negative coping strategy, please, for the sake of your marriage, significant relationship, family relationships, parent to child relationship, just step up.
oh yeah,
Because an addiction's very powerful, and it more times than not requires professional assistance, and that's okay. No,
absolutely.
people go to the gym and hire a physical fitness trainer, and nobody bats an eye. But you reach out to a doctor for mental health or an addiction, and everyone's like, "What's wrong with you?" Nothing's wrong with you. It's just something's bothering you, and you're dealing with it in a negative way, and it's consuming you. But it doesn't have to, and you don't have to let it, and you don't have to settle for it at all. So
No,
definitely reach out, just like
yeah,
you said.
yeah. You don't have to live, in that secret little box all by yourself. You
No, no.
you you can reach out. There's people. I mean, and this is why we do this. This is why we have these conversations, so that other people can see, like, man, I'm not alone. And the thing is, if you've got something like that you're battling, let's say it's just the addiction of pornography, and you're getting ready to go into marriage, and you're like, "Oh, that'll stop once I get married." It ain't gonna stop.
Mm-mm.
I'm just gonna tell you that right now. I
Yeah,
mean,
right. Yeah.
like, if there's anything that's going on, or even if there's complications in the relationship before you get married, right? You guys are having disagreements and things like that. You got to get that flushed out, because you're like, "Oh, well, once we get married, it'll stop." It's not going to stop,
No, it's
right?
an
If
addiction.
anything,
Yep.
yeah, if anything, marriage is just going to exacerbate it, because now hey, now we've both made this commitment. So it's like, you've got to be able to flush these things out, and you've got to get somebody in there to help you out. So, and I appreciate you sharing that, Scott.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's always tough to do, but I am very shocked at how many times I do share it, and people come up to me and say, I battled that too. And
Yeah,
so thank you. Yeah. So it's
yeah.
like, yeah, you're not alone. You're not
No,
alone.
you're not. And I'll be straight with you that I did too. You know,
Wow. Right.
and that's just where that's the reality of it, right? Is that, man, it creeps in, and the next thing you know, you're like, "Whoa."
Yeah. How'd I get here?
Yeah. So
Right.
absolutely. And like I said, we could do a whole other episode just on that.
Right. We definitely could.
But I want to give you the opportunity to, talk about what you're doing, now post career, and just how you're really wanting to impact the law enforcement community. But first, I mean, when you look back at your career, what are three of the most significant things that you've learned that you would like to pass on to those in the career, and those just starting?
Yeah, yeah, no, I would definitely say three things I bring up in my 10 code mindset presentation are acknowledgement, awareness, and action. Like, acknowledge that you're a human being. For the longest time, I said the very familiar phrase that's only 3 words long. No, and it's not just suck it up. No,
Yeah.
or suck it up. Sorry, just suck it up is 4 words. I can't count apparently. But that famous phrase, I am fine.
Yep.
And there were times I was fine, but then there were times I wasn't. Like, particularly the first time I saw a successful suicide, that ripped me apart. But do you think I said anything to anybody? Heck no. I just thought, well, I've been treated for PTSD when I got home from Iraq. I'm good.
Yeah.
That ate me alive for a few weeks until I finally had to say something to somebody. And but I did my best to say I am fine. So acknowledge that you're human. Just you have cortisol that will release. And as a law enforcement officer or other first responder, you're more at risk for elevated levels of cortisol, which can damage your physical health. It, there's no shame in saying, hey, I'm a human. But when you acknowledge that you're human, I always stress the next thing is self-awareness. And this is where education comes in, because for far too many years throughout my time in law enforcement, particularly the first 9 years of my career, I didn't know anything about hypervigilance because I was never trained on it. And when I would go out with my wife and our friends, I had to make sure that my back was to the wall, I was facing the door, and I'm not knocking that tactic at all. I still do it to this day, but I couldn't stop watching the door. I couldn't stop watching what other people were doing. And my wife would say, hey, you're doing that thing again. Like, I'm here. She's like, hey, I'm down. She's a lot shorter than me. She was like, I'm down here. and, but I thought I'm fine. So I would tell her, well, at least I'm aware of my surroundings. So I'm not knocking awareness, but physically I was with my wife. I was sitting beside her, but mentally, nowhere with her.
Yeah.
Not even. And that, along with many other things, led to us kind of growing apart. But I didn't know about this stuff because I was trained on external factors, people patting their waist or giving, looking around when you get out with them, trying to look for the escape route, and they might run, like external things. Never trained on what to look for internally. So we got to raise our education in that and just be honest with ourselves. You're like, man, people are telling me I'm irritable. Get out of your own way if need be, and say, you know what? They can't relate to what I'm going through, but they might have a point. Like, look yourself in the mirror and be like, am I really being irritable? Well, particularly those who care about me, they're saying it for a reason. They don't want to see me this way. And then, but nothing change. You can raise your awareness and acknowledge you're human all day long, but nothing changes unless you take action, like new steps, which can be very hard to do. I've already addressed that. But, something as simple yet profound is to work on your habits, because when you work on your habits, like what you do, which is a major part of your life, but it's just these simple steps along the way to work on strengthening good habits and knocking out bad ones and replacing them. It's worth the effort, because all of a sudden, no matter what occurs on the outside, whether it's a toxic work environment or a loved one is hit with a challenge and you're feeling the weight of that as well, you can weather it. You can weather that storm, and you can rise above and prevail. Particularly shifting your mindset and reframing things. So it's all this different action items, which won't be easy. They will not be easy, but they'll be totally worth it. And that's what I had to learn many times the hard way throughout my career. But also I learned you've got to be with the right people and be around supportive people in and outside of work. You got to put focus on them. And then also, please put your family first. It's so easy to get wrapped up into the career that becomes essentially who you are. And I'm sure other people have mentioned this on your show, but it cannot be said enough that one day you will not work in the career and the department is going to move on without you. They will. But those at home, they can't move on without you. Like that affects them. So be there for them as much as you can, in the sense of maybe, you're going to be at work more, but when you are at home, be present to them, not hyper vigilant or constantly checking emails. Be present to them. So those are some big things I learned, in addition to all the research I've done to write these books that I wrote, like my recent one, 101 stress busting tips for first responders. There's a lot that goes into it, and a lot needs to be said. So that's what I have to say, and I appreciate you asking about that.
No, absolutely, because I think that's important. I think it's important for people to hear where others have learned from the profession and kind of pass that on. And I think that you sharing about making sure that you're investing in your family is huge, because that's your social support network.
Yeah,
and they're the ones that are going to be there. Hopefully, they're going to be there right when your profession's over, when the career ends, when you retire, when you decide, okay, hey, enough's enough, and you step away. They're the ones that are still going to be there, right?
Yep.
As long as you've put them as the priority and you've continued to invest in those relationships, right? And keep that social support network, just fed and nourished and part of your life. But so often the job becomes just an overwhelming, aspect of every individual.
Oh yeah,
It's just,
it really does.
hey, I've
Yeah,
got to, I've got to do this to get to the next spot and the next spot and the next spot and the next spot. But the reality of it is, whether you retire or leave as, just a patrol officer, patrol deputy, or sergeant, captain, major, whatever it may be, there's already a plan in place to replace you with the next patrol officer, patrol deputy, next sergeant, next lieutenant, next
and
captain,
fast too.
next major, right?
Yeah,
Sometimes even before you're even finished and out the door, right?
exactly.
That succession's already there. So there's already somebody that's
Yeah,
going to step in and fill that spot.
yeah, yeah.
But
100%.
if you're a dad, if you're a mom, you're a husband, you're a wife, you are the one that always has to fill that spot.
Yeah, good way to put it.
Right. So you got to prioritize it. You got to make sure that you're putting things where they need to be and making sure you're investing where things need to be invested. I'm not saying, not invest in your career, because obviously that's important, right? But make sure it's not at the sacrifice of your family.
Yeah, yeah. I remember when I had to resign from the K-9 unit for family reasons, and a almost retired officer who had been on the K-9 unit for years, he told me, he said, it's not worth losing your family over a dog. He said, I know this is hard, but you did the right thing. So I'm not saying someone has to do what I did, but like it got to that point. I don't want it to get to that point for you.
Yeah.
But and all it really came down to was when I was at home, I wasn't present with my family mentally. Like I was physically there, but the calling, the mission, the focus was at work, and it should have never gotten that way. So this is all part of the education part as well that just really has to be instilled, particularly to those going through the academy and new officers, so they can lay that foundation. Thus, their career can end up more successful than what like mine ended up being. So I mean, it's important.
No, it is. It's very important. I want to give you some time to talk about, kind of what you're doing post now, post career. And, you've talked about, you've written some books, you've got a podcast. So kind of dive into that a little bit and how you kind of got into doing that and what continues to motivate you for that.
Well, in January of 2020, I was on the job for about 13 years, and that's when I learned for the first time that more officers were dying by suicide than in the line of duty. I'm not saying that was the first time it happened. It's been happening, but that was the first time I learned about it. And it kind of ticked me off that I was 13 years in and then learning, wait, I'm more of a threat to myself. And we were never taught about this. Now, obviously, it's well known now, the statistics of more likely to die by your own hands. But I felt just called to jump into the fight to help officers lift themselves up and to keep going, to grow as people, because what I saw throughout their career, and including myself, was a lot of survival, existing, just making it to the next day, and then counting down to retirement like you were serving out a prison sentence. And I know that's going to make some people tune out of this episode right now, but I teach a lot about mindset, like your set of established attitudes and beliefs, but it's not permanent. You can always shift your mindset, and it's not going to be easy, but what there's that saying, where your attention goes, energy flows. And it's very important in law enforcement and other first responder work to shift your attention to what you can do, what you can control, and also be mindful of your thoughts, because a lot of them are negative throughout the day. You don't have to give them any weight. You don't have to believe them. Those ambitious thoughts and those thoughts of action moving forward and healthy coping weight, those are what you have to put a shift on. And there's obviously exercises you can do, and that's what I teach about nationwide, as to how to strengthen your mindset. But I hate seeing numbers about officers struggling. The morale issue is a big one, of being overworked. So it's just a matter of empowering and also prevailing, which doesn't have to be anything huge, just little steps to grow day in and day out, which growth as a person means you have the more ability to serve others, which means you're living and you can bring fulfillment in that, even in the hard times. Like I'm heading to North Dakota in a little while, or in a few weeks, and then Washington. So I've been blessed to speak across the country to criminal justice professionals, other first responders, and we'll continue to do so as long as God's willing for me to do that.
Good. So tell me about your podcast.
Yeah, the 10 Code Mindset podcast. I bring on guests. I get my own tangents every now and then on solo episodes, and we just talk about how to rise and prevail. Bottom line, we can't settle for the pain. You're more than your job title. You are more than the struggle. We're going to rise above, and that's the mission behind the 10 Code Mindset, because the stress, demands, and trauma, they're going to be there.
Yep.
They're going to be there. And let's arm ourselves against them in the sense of dealing with them the right way, rather than falling into what's easy, like the alcohol or addictions or impulsive behavior. No shame in that if you fall into it, but we got to get you out. Got to help each other as well. And my website is thescottmedlin.com if anybody's just interested in everything. YouTube, podcast, speaking. It's like thescottmedlin.com is home base on the internet for me.
Okay. And I'll add that in the show notes so that, it's there. So you said you got a new book you just wrapped up.
101 stress busting tips for first responders. It's a short read, but it's straightforward techniques to help you focus on solutions and not focus on these stressors. A lot of people have already given great reviews about it and posted about it on LinkedIn and just said like, hey, I wish I'd have read this earlier, or these are things I can actually do to help me. So, hey, why not? And it's on Amazon, 101 stress busting tips for first responders.
All right. And I'll try to plug that in the show notes as well. And then, so what else, what other books have you penned? So
my first one was Mental Health Fight of the Heroes in Blue. Second one was 101 Health Tips for Police Officers. And then I focused in on the rookies because I miss being a training officer. So I said, well, let me just put it in a book or books, and that way I can still train new officers. And it's happened. Truth Beyond the Police Academy, and then also 101 Useful Tips for Rookie Police Officers. I know of one department, they actually order that book for their recruits who are graduating. I'm really honored by that, because as much as I miss being an FTO, I can still kind of be an FTO to these recruits that get that book. And a lot of my YouTube audience has gotten that book as well. And then I wrote The Power in Showing Up, which was more or less like personal story of struggles, but also how I rose above, and just to let people know they're not alone in their struggles. Others are going through it, and there's ways to work your way out of it. Like you said earlier, help you bring you to the light, but you see the light and keep going towards it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, no, and I appreciate your time. And kind of before we wrap up here, what is, when you look back at your career and everything that you've done and kind of where you're at now, how much has your faith played a role in that?
Huge. I often say when I go present, two things for me personally helped save me from just getting worse was essentially faith and fitness. Just surrendering to God and saying, okay, I can't do this on my own, because, so many times we get to a point where we think, oh, I got this. And then you're like, you're humbled.
Yeah.
And you say, oh, like when I battled the addiction, I was like, God, I got nothing. I can't shake this. And I called the doctor and then had like a quote relapse, for lack of a better phrase. And right after that, when I was being eaten away by Satan's putting that shame on me and everything, the doctor called. Like, it was in the worst moment, the doctor called. And I that was like God saying, here's your help. Go get it. You reached out to me. Here's your help. Go get it. And then, it's even biblical to take care of your body. It's like your temple to therefore be able to serve others and serve the Lord. So, but fitness also helps with mental health as well. So yeah, faith, fitness. And then, but man, yeah, the way I look at it as well is, I'm imperfect. You're imperfect. We're all imperfect. Let's follow the perfect God.
Yep.
Can't go wrong with that.
Absolutely. And I appreciate you sharing that. So I'll plug, your information in the show notes. I can't thank you enough for coming on and just sharing your story, sharing, kind of what you're doing and the resources you're providing, to our, fellow law enforcement professionals. And
thank you.
Keep at it, man. Don't stop.
I will. Thank you very much.
All right. Thank you, man.
I appreciate you tuning in and listening to Critical Aspects of Law Enforcement. Remember to subscribe to the podcast and share this resource with your fellow officers. The goal of Critical Aspects is to serve, support, and sustain the law enforcement professionals. So head over to www.criticalaspects.org for more resources and information. And as always, God bless and be safe.